decided they needed was a clean sheet approach. So what they did is they outlined specifications for this Jeep vehicle, if you will, and what they called it was a truck 1/4 ton 4x4. The weight was supposed to be 1,300 pounds with a 600-pound payload. Those were the basic descriptors of the original contract that went out for the quote of the vehicles.
During the 30s, Americans had shown a strong appetite for large, roomy, powerful automobiles, and few manufacturers were devoting their energies toward the design and development of lightweight vehicles. Another specification dictated by the Army was equally daunting. A running pilot car would have to be delivered to Camp Holabird in Baltimore, Maryland, in only 49 days. 135 letters of intent were sent to the automotive industry at large, inviting any and all interested builders to compete for the startup contract worth $175,000 for an initial run of 70 vehicles. The unheard-of specifications and stringent time limit were enough to keep all but two companies from responding to the challenge: Willys Overland in Toledo, Ohio, and the American Bantam Car Company. Bantam claimed it could meet the specifications and have the pilot vehicle delivered in 49 days. Willys Overland was less sure and was granted an extension to 120 days to deliver their prototype. What happened next is an involved cross-current of personal initiative and political intrigue that would center around two men: Carl Probst of Bantam and Barney Roos of Willys Overland.
Well, Carl Probst was an independent contractor hired by Bantam to do the design of this Jeep vehicle. It wasn't called the Jeep then, of this early reconnaissance car. He was given the task to design it. He did the basic design in 5 days and built the first prototype in 49 days. That's the Blitz buggy that was driven out to Camp Holabird for the original testing. He is the undisputed father of the Jeep, if you will. That fact has never been in dispute, although Barney Roos and Carl Probst got into some heated discussions over that. Barney Roos was the chief engineer at Willys Overland Motor Company. He was in charge of the basic design of all of the Willys Overland cars at the time. And he was a chief engineer extraordinaire. He was very adept at solving any type of problems. He's also an engineer's engineer. He would get his hands dirty and dig into the problems and understand what made things tick and what needed to be improved.
The importance of winning the Army contract for Bantam was not lost on Carl Probst. Bantam was in failing financial health, so much so that Probst was hired on spec, meaning that he would only be paid if his design of the LRV was chosen by the Army. The pressure of meeting the government specifications and the time limit was now further exacerbated by what appeared to be a life-or-death scenario facing Bantam. Behind the scenes at the Pentagon, military decision-makers questioned amongst themselves whether Bantam, which now operated with a limited production facility, could meet the volume requirements the Army would be looking at should Bantam's LRV design win the contract. And so, while Carl Probst was scouring the parts bins at Bantam to adapt existing Bantam components to his emerging design, the Army was asking the Ford Motor Company to join the search for a workable light reconnaissance vehicle.
You got to understand there were several factions within the various divisions of government saying Bantam couldn't supply enough vehicles. They only had 450 people total. Willys Overland had 5,000 people in total. Ford Motor Company had 100,000. So there are various different sizes of corporations you're dealing with here. The government didn't feel Bantam could supply in any quantity the vehicles that they were requiring. So they were going behind the scenes and encouraging both Ford and Willys Overland to submit their vehicles, and they would be considered for testing, even though they were late.
Back in Pennsylvania, Probst was joined by Bantam employees Frank Fenn, Harold Quist, and a small team of associates who would assist in the acquisition of component parts and oversee assembly once the time came for actual construction of the prototype. But before they could reach that point, it would be entirely up to Probst to create a successful design that had been granted little room for error.
Carl had an exceptionally large staff. It included him, himself, and no one else. He basically did it on a drawing board about the size of my desk, over a weekend. Once you laid out the basic drivetrain, you threw a body around it, and you didn't have a lot of emissions controls to worry about, or airbags or seat belts. You were basically just sitting out there. The only seat belt they had was a canvas webbing that went from one side of the door post to the other, just to make sure you didn't fall out. There wasn't a lot on the vehicle. He did it all.
Once Probst had drawn up blueprints for the Bantam LRV, the Army would need to review them and give the go-ahead for a prototype. The blueprints received quick approval from the military, but unbeknownst to Probst and his colleagues, they were then forwarded to Willys Overland and Ford to help speed up the development of their designs. As the Bantam prototype took shape in the summer of 1940, it was a model of engineering simplicity. A sturdy frame with only 2 crossmembers on an 80-inch wheelbase, Spicer axles including a rear unit based on a Studebaker Champion production differential, and a 42-horsepower Continental engine, which offered more power than Bantam's own in-house engine, comprised the platform for the new LRV. The body was a hasty fusion of raw sheet metal and junkyard cast-offs, including a hood fashioned from a discarded trunk lid. 47 days after putting pencil to paper, the Bantam team rolled their Blitz buggy into the light of day for the first time. 2 days later, on September 23, 1940, after sharing the driving duties on the 230-mile trip from Pennsylvania, Carl Probst and Harold Christ arrived at Camp Holabird in the Bantam Blitz buggy, some 30 minutes before the Army's 49-day time limit expired. The new LRV was submitted for testing before a panel of Army brass and the critical eyes of representatives from the other competing manufacturers. With little, if any, field testing behind it, the Bantam prototype was subjected to a battery of rugged, relentless tests designed to uncover any structural weaknesses or design flaws the compact vehicle might be suffering from. Passing each test with flying colors, it appeared that the Blitz buggy had won the Army over, until the question of the vehicle's overall weight threatened to end Bantam's hopes of winning the production contract.
The interesting thing in this story is that when the original specifications went out, the vehicle was to weigh no more than 1,350 pounds. Bantam's prototype weighed in at 1,800 pounds, and that was some of the reluctance of the other car companies to submit bids. No one knew how to build a car to meet those strict weight requirements. Even today, we have a hard time meeting, weight requirements of that magnitude. They got a little, once they saw what the vehicle could do, the general sat around, deciding, and they said, "Don't worry about that. We'll put it down as a typo. It'll slide through the system. As long as 4 men can pick it up out of a ditch, we'll consider it an acceptable weight." And they got one strong sergeant to go over, and he basically lifted it out by himself. He said, "That's fine. We'll take it." So it kind of is what set the stage for the weight requirement. And they basically weighed the Blitz buggy and said, "That's the weight requirement, 1,850 pounds."
3 more weeks of heavy-handed testing revealed that the Bantam design was on target. If a part or system on the Blitz buggy did fail during testing, Army mechanics found they could be repaired easily. Bantam was given the green light to build a total of 72 Blitz buggies for further Army evaluation. But the exceptional performance of the Bantam prototype had not escaped the interest of Willys Overland. With Bantam's blueprints in hand, Barney Roos went about the task of building his prototype, adopting much of the basic design methodology he found